This is what we're looking at this morning on Media and Society. We ask, what is cancel culture? We unpack the impact of cancel culture in South Africa. How often is climate change mentioned in South African media? Later on the program, we discuss the role of media in covering climate change issues. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. My name is Naledi Muleo. This is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences. And of course, this show is not complete without your say. So connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed you. Hashtag SABC Media Society, or give us a call over the next hour. The number is 011-714-0661. So I'm sure you remember this. In 2020, a video of Expresso presenter Katlego Maboe being accused by his partner of cheating went viral on social media. And of course, the public on those platforms has said that he must be cancelled, which led to him losing his work on the show and also losing advertisement gigs as well. 2 years later, he's back on the show and has subsequently become a TikTok hit. But we focus on cancel culture this morning. It's a social media concept which UCT Vice Chancellor Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng has called toxic, destructive, and said hurts hardworking creatives who aren't given space to learn from their mistakes. Well, this week, Wits Professor of Journalism Anton Harber shared similar views in a piece he wrote for Business Day. Harber referred to those who constantly call on people to be cancelled as mobs. Well, be part of the conversation. Give us a call, 011-714-0661. We're speaking now to Anton Harber himself, who joins us via Zoom, and we're also joined by brand and reputation management expert, Mr. Solly Moeng. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I think this is a conversation that I think for South Africans is long overdue. Solly, I want to start with you, right? We've seen so many versions of cancel culture, but perhaps you can think about really where it comes from, right? This ideal that we can essentially have people on social media make a decision that can impact someone's entire career.
Hello, good morning, lady. Good morning, Prof, and to viewers out there. Look, I think that I would like to have this discussion outside of the Maboe story, because now the Maboe story is a very interesting one, the way it has evolved. But look, we also live in a society where there'll always be a clash of narratives, right? Dominant people think that it's almost like the winner must take all kind of attitude. People think that we are the most in terms of number, and our views must dominate. Your view must shut up, must not be heard. And I think that it'll always be there. It's almost like brands. Brands are always constantly fighting for space. Narratives are always fighting for space. If you keep quiet and you let the loudest people, who are not necessarily the most correct, shut you up, then you lose out. They win, not because they are winning on facts, but because they win in terms of taking the space. So it's important that you always push back. There'll always be a form of cancel culture. We call it cancel culture today, but it's probably always been there.
Yeah. Anton, I want to come to you and say, we'll get into, I know you've written quite a hefty piece on this, and I want to get into some of the points that you make. But the reality is social media is a place where discourse happens. The question perhaps we should be asking ourselves is how much how we qualify that discourse, right?
Well, let me start by saying that is slightly misrepresented what I argued in my piece, because what I said in my piece is that cancel culture gives the power to ordinary people to call to account people, celebrities, and people with power, and that's not a bad thing. And cancel culture is saying, we call for the isolation, a boycott of this person because they behave badly, or they've expressed racist views or sexist views. That's not a bad thing, and people are entitled to boycott those that they think cross a path of social acceptability. That's in fact a good thing. It helps the social and political discourse. there is a danger that occasionally it becomes a mob and it runs wild on Twitter and it becomes threatening and harassing. It is sometimes abused, so we've seen some very petty cases. But in fact, in most cases, when you take a close look at those, they're being used for political effect to say, look, they're calling, this is cancel culture because they're saying, I shouldn't be saying these things. But the truth is sometimes you shouldn't be saying those things or doing those things. So I think you have to see that it does empower ordinary people to call to account celebrities who otherwise often behave appallingly.
But they should. I mean, and let's talk about the danger that is abused. And we've seen certain examples. And perhaps, Solly, you can talk about the examples that stand out for you, where we've seen social media bringing about that decision to cancel an individual, and you felt that it has been abused. I don't think this is the great example, but you've got the example of former President Donald Trump, who has very little presence right now on social media. Is that abuse? Is that what Anton is saying? Well, some things really should not be said, and some people deserve to be cancelled.
Well, I mean, Trump abused a lot of his power in a lot of ways. You saw the way he responded to media, he attacked media, he almost even personally used gender insults against female journalists. So it's a very different case. I'm interested in the Helen Zille case. In South Africa, people would love to hate Helen Zille, and people would like to assume that everything she says is not correct, which is not true. So we've created this culture around Helen Zille that each time she opens her mouth, she must shut up because she's just the right person to speak. But a lot of times what she says is correct if you really keep quiet to listen. But now it's almost automatic that you don't listen to Helen Zille because whatever she says, I'm not saying that everything she says has to be said in the way that she says it, but people who are close to Helen Zille will refute the accusation that she's a racist person, but we've assumed that she's racist. Each time she opens her mouth, she's going to say something that justifies apartheid, that is racist, and all that. So we don't. So that's a real example of cancel culture in South Africa.
Yeah,
I wonder if I could respond.
Yes, go ahead.
I think it's an interesting example because Helen Zille can't be cancelled. She's one of the loudest voices in our society. So because people take her on and people abuse her, now when it gets threatening and rude, it crosses the line. But rude is okay. Threatening is a problem. But that's part of the political discourse, and it's a healthy political discourse. And to suggest that Helen Zille is cancelled is nonsense. She's on Twitter, she's loud, she's noisy, we all know what she's saying and thinking. It's a perfect example of saying cancel, but she's not cancelled.
Now, can I just say this? There's a difference between being cancelled and there being attempts to cancel one. There's a different thing. Okay, Helen Zille cannot be cancelled. I totally agree with that. But are there attempts to cancel her? Of course there are attempts to cancel her. People like you seriously would keep saying, she must shut up.
But but guys, just a second. Let's just control the conversation here. I think the point that is being made here, and just to bring it back in, is that when the example of someone like Helen Zille, you may have the discourse that wants to cancel her, but the media certainly is going to go back to, I'm talking mainstream media, still going to go back and listen to her opinion. And so you're right, someone like that, it is more difficult to cancel them. But I want to bring it back in and focus on really the heat of the issue here, right? I think of an artist like a presenter like DJ Fresh, who had a platform on national radio, was removed from that platform by the station because of a word that he used on air that I cannot repeat, even though there's ideas that it wasn't actually a real word in the first place. And then social media said, he's insulting women, he needs to go, right? And I wonder if perhaps the real issue here is that the institutions themselves, the media institutions themselves, just respond to the social media noise without analyzing the issue at hand. Solly, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, look, it's yes and no. But the truth is, society also responds to certain things that are contextual. If you think in South Africa of the situation of women, GBV, which is very rife, like Maboe story or even DJ Fresh story, the minute you say or you do something that seems to be reinforcing or repeating this very toxic culture of hitting women, insulting women, treating women as many people do, society is, even brands are forced to create a distance between themselves and you because they don't want to be accused of supporting people who perpetuate GBV, as it were. But then the third thing, especially in the case of Mabua, is that when 2-3 years later the courts say, but wait a minute, this is not what it was, then it becomes something else, then it changes the narrative that we have to have a fresh conversation. But the story still remains that you can't keep an association with somebody who is seen to be perpetuating something that is antisocial, because then the ramifications, especially commercially, if you're a brand, can be massive.
Do you want to respond to that, Anton?
I do. Thank you very much. What you're suggesting is that there was too much sensitivity to the use of sexist language. But as Solly has said, in a society with a deep and profound problem of gender-based violence and misogyny and patriarchy, how can you be too sensitive on these issues? So it should be absolutely clear. It used to be that radio stations and DJs could do what they like, behave as badly as they like. They've lost that power. It's not a bad thing. If their DJs use words or phrases or attitudes that are socially unacceptable, people can call for them to be isolated, to be thrown off. Now, the station has a choice to follow that or not. And if they've got some guts and they think it's justified, they'll stick with the person, But calling to account people, particularly celebrities who behave badly, is not a bad thing, providing it's within certain parameters, providing it's not threatening and harassing. And we do see that on social media. That's the problem.
I think you raise an interesting point, Anton, where you say, well, what you're asserting is that people should be able to even use sexist language on platforms like that, and I agree. But the reality is, when that person is okay,
I'm not saying they should. I'm sorry, I'm not saying they should. I'm saying people must call them out.
Yes.
And make the station take account for bad behavior.
No, I agree with you. My point that I'm saying is that the reality is, once that person is cancelled, there's another narrative that goes back onto social media, right? That then speaks out about the person being cancelled. We've seen that too. You've seen the noise saying cancel them, and then the noise saying this is unfair. What he did was so minute. And that's what we need to tackle here, right? That there is that conversation going on. I want to take a short break. When we come back, let's maybe talk about what the steps really should be to get things right, or even the conversations that we need to be having as a country around cancel culture, around toxic behavior and how we respond to it on social media, but also how the big corporates respond to the narratives that are taking place on those big platforms. Let's take a little break. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. And remember, we're taking your calls as well. Be part of the discussion. The number to call is 011-714-0661 or 0662. Or get onto Twitter and use the hashtag SABC Media Society. My guests this morning, Professor Anton Harber from University of Wits and brand reputation management expert Solly Moeng, as we discuss cancel culture and its impact. So one of the questions that came up as I discussed this with my producers during the break, Solly, is the impact that cancel culture has on the person that's being cancelled. We saw the death of Patrick Shai recently. Celebrity actor Hlomla Dandala said cancel culture is what led to the suicide of Patrick Shai. I mean, what do we say to that, to the impact that can have on individuals?
Of course, it can be horrific, but the thing is, it also depends on what the individual has done. I mean, there are people who must probably be cancelled, like Jacob Zuma. I'm kidding, but look, when you get accused of speaking out, of taking a stance that is correct, that can be justified, you have to keep pushing back, because we live in a world of narratives that are constantly pushing against one another. But when you give up and say you and then you end up losing your livelihood, of course, it can be terrible for you, for your family. So I think we need to take every case on merit.
Yeah.
It can be bad. Katlego Mabue would have lost his job, but his story is not entirely finished, is it? Because the lady that is his partner has not come out to say, okay, it's okay, I forgive this man, let him continue his life. She hasn't come back to say that, but it looks like the tide has turned against her, right? But others have not survived. Many people have not survived that kind of cancel culture. And the question is, do they deserve to be cancelled or not? That's a discussion we should be having.
Yeah. Let's take calls. Mandla is on the line in Cape Town. Mandla, good morning to you.
Good morning. Okay, I just want to make a comment as far as this cancel culture is concerned. This is nothing else but based on jealousy. That means young people are not actually given even a chance to learn. Immediately make a mistake, especially on a miss, it actually happens even in the business environment. Well, of course, even for important people are feeling that it must be taken off immediately. You see, that's the only comment. I mean, I'm totally against the whole cancel culture, which is actually anything in South Africa. Thanks for that.
Yeah, Mandla, thank you so much for calling. We're taking more calls at 011-714-0661. Okay, so Mandla essentially saying we don't give them a chance to learn from their mistakes. I wonder if there's something to be said, Anton, about criminal processes where we've seen cancel culture as a result of criminal allegations, right? You have an artist, a musician in South Africa, one called Java, who is accused by a partner of violence, right? Then we essentially see that the social media public essentially saying, cancel this man, we do not support people that are, perpetrators of gender-based violence. He loses a lot of work. For a long time, he's unable to work. Then essentially there's the issue that, well, there was really no resolution around the legal processes and whether or not he had actually committed the crime, and then he gets back to work. So I wonder if cancel culture also, when organizations make decisions, also need to be following what the legal process is saying and not just the public narrative. Anton?
We do live in a society where if you rely on the legal process, you're relying on nothing. It may never reach a resolution. So let me say this. If there's no evidence that this person indulged in gender-based violence, then clearly it's not fair. Where there is evidence and the person is in the public arena, I'm sorry, my view would be I want nothing to do with that person. And if people and young people are out there saying, whoa, if there's serious allegations against this person, they should be isolated, because we do have to let's make it clear. We have to act and isolate people against whom there's evidence of gender-based violence. Now, we have to be careful. We have to make sure that it's not petty. We have to make sure it's not kind of personal vendettas. And we can't cross a line into threatening that person. There's got to be parameters. And there's got to be rules. I accept that. But calling out a person where there's evidence of gender-based violence, good thing.
Listen, I think,
add to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Sally, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe we should have a generalized step-aside regulation in society. There are people, as we say, who get accused of really, really serious stuff. Some of it turns out to be true, some of it not. Look, there's a case, it's in the media already. Wusite McCoy has been accused by his wife, now it's in the courts, apparently in Johannesburg. What do you say to him? He's an otherwise awesome, interesting, impressive, good achiever. So the kind of South African you want to see. But these accusations are hurting his image. What must we do? Must we cancel him? We can't make favors. We can't do favors, really, can we? Do brands that are associated with him give him a chance to sort this thing out so that he can come back and continue where he left off? What do they do? It's a very complex one. But you can't, as Anton says, as a process, it's absolutely correct. When somebody gets accused of that kind of stuff, you can't continue associating your brand to theirs, because it's going to hurt your brand.
Yeah, I wonder if we're spending a lot of time talking about what social media is doing, what the advertisers are doing, and what the media organizations are doing, not actually looking at the responsibility that public figures have, and if they have a full grasp on how massive that is. I'm going to come back to you, Solly, because this is really part of your work, is to make people understand that if you have a platform, your responsibility is a lot bigger than most.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we live in a society of no consequences in South Africa. Too many people every day get away with stuff they shouldn't get away with. We need to stop. And the only way to stop it is to cancel those people. And they must sort themselves out. They must go out there, get their names. Because the thing is, a lot of people think it's okay. It's okay. If so-and-so can do it, so can I. So when the fish rots at the head, the top at the head, which it has in South Africa, especially in the political and even in the media, in the business space, other people see, why should I be the one for whom the law applies, and it doesn't apply for the other people? So those people, we need to raise the bar for people in public office, even people in business. We have to raise the bar, and there's got to be visible consequences. There are no consequences, and as long as there are no consequences, South Africa will keep going down.
Yeah, Anton, can I bring that same question to you? Is that, do we actually need to start talking about accountability for people with a platform?
Absolutely. There's no question that if you're a public figure, particularly in the political world, then first of all, you have to be robust. You're going to say harsh things about other people. You've got to take it yourself. That doesn't mean anything's acceptable, but we do have a robust political debate in this country. And it's perfectly acceptable to be rude, to be offensive, but not threatening. That's the line for me. And if you're a public figure, you have to, and you're part of the public discourse. I'm afraid that goes with it. And let me tell you something else. We keep talking about people with power and celebrity. Now, if you're falsely accused, you can take legal action against people who defame you or falsely accuse you. The real problem here is, as our caller said, if there's teenagers who do it to each other, and they're just ordinary teenagers who make mistakes, that's very worrying. But when it's people in the public eye, they must be called to account because they are role models.
Yeah. Did we have anything similar to this prior to social media? Because I'm thinking, where was the public discourse for dealing with sexist behavior pre-Twitter and Facebook? Anton, I'll bring that one to you.
No, social media has given an enormous amount of power to ordinary people to take on these issues, to express themselves, to organize, to campaign. There's no question it's been very empowering to ordinary people. Now, there are dangers, there are negatives to that we can see. It can easily be used in a mob mentality. But I mean, the Trump was raised earlier on as somebody who was canceled. Now, there's a guy who used social media to try and organize an insurrection, an attack on Congress, and overturn an election. I mean, that seems to me the guy should be in prison, never mind canceled.
Yeah.
Can I just say,
Sure.
just quickly, look, social media is here to stay. I don't want to live in China or in Russia or in Iran, in places where you can't communicate on social media. I think that there's got to be consequences. People must know that the minute you press enter or send, you take responsibility for what you put out there. But we can't have a society where you can't communicate. People have been given the power to speak back. People who are shy, who are sitting in their homes and be in front of their keyboards, they can say whatever they want, but there's got to be consequences if they put stuff out there that shouldn't be put out there. That's what it should be. But it's not the platform or the medium that's a problem. It's how people use the medium.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I want to start to work towards maybe finding solutions for some of the parties involved here, right? Sally, Naledi is a public figure. There is something that she needs to learn. What does she need to do so that she knows exactly what her responsibility is? Because you get the platform and then you revel in it, but there's an upskilling surely that needs to happen there.
Yeah, well, when you become very powerful, you need to be even more aware of the impact of what you do and what you say to the people, to the world around you. There's power that comes with it. And with power comes responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. So if you abuse that responsibility, there will be consequences. And there has got to be consequences so that other people don't follow in your steps. So Naledi, I think some coaching, some understanding, more awareness of one's brand is very important.
Yeah. And Anton, quickly before I let you go, Anton Harbour Media Platform. You are the media platform, and your staff member is all over social media. People are saying, Anton, you need to get rid of Naledi. What is the process that you take?
Well, you don't just listen to the social media, you investigate the accusations. If there's good reason for it, then you have to act. Not saying you get rid of them, but you have to take appropriate disciplinary or other action. Base it on the evidence. Use the social media to alert you to it, keep an eye on it. But then if you think the person is right and the person needs to be defended, defend them. It's all part of the social discourse. It's rich, it can be tough, but it's fantastic to have a society in which there's rich and full open discourse.
Yeah. It really is a brave new world where citizens have the impact on so much. Let's leave it there. Thank you so much to my guests, Anton Harber, as well as Solly Moeng. Let's take a short break. When we return, we'll talk about how the media in South Africa covers climate change. Welcome back. So in March this year, a piece on Neiman Reports said journalists are very good at saying climate change is real, but offer little to no information on guidance or solutions. Recently, Ground Up quoted science writer Leonie Joubert when she said the media has failed in its role to warn society about climate collapse. The effects of climate change have been seen in the flooding that has hit KwaZulu-Natal. We've seen that. There's the drought that hits repeatedly in parts of Africa as well. It's a global problem and it's real. But how are we reporting on it? Joining me to talk about how journalists report on climate change and its effects is SABC's Minashni Pillay. We're also joined by David Lepage, who is a journalist and one of the authors of the new fossil-free SA climate report guide. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. A good morning to you. I think, David, I want to start with you and ask you, when you look at the South African media landscape, right, I think I just want you to rate how we're doing in reporting on climate change from 1 to 10, or from 0 to 10, 10 being we're doing brilliantly.
I'd say we'd have to put it about 2 to 3 at the moment, the lady. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And I think one can judge this to some degree by public opinions and knowledge of the issue. And an HSRC report from last year tells us that only 20% of South Africans actually know that climate change is happening and that human beings are the cause.
Okay, that's scary. Minashni, what's your rating?
Unfortunately, Naledi, I'm not far from David. You know, as a climate change journalist myself, I must hang my head in shame and say we're not far from David's rating. We're definitely under 5. I'd say we're at a 3 or 4. It's not for a lack of trying, however. You know, climate change journalists, environmental journalists come up against what newsrooms across the country, from print to broadcast, classify as breaking news, top stories, hard news, you know, stories that are oftentimes political, driving the news cycle. And we've got to pitch climate change stories and, you know, get them on top as top stories and get, you know, editors to view them as top stories and see the necessity and the importance of them on a daily basis. That's a struggle and a fight for journalists that are, you know, fighting the climate change story every day in newsrooms. So it's not an easy answer, but like David said, I think we need to break down the jargon, even climate change itself. The word has become such almost a buzzword, but what does it really mean? What do South Africans understand about it? I think we need to go back to basics and start there.
Yeah.
I would absolutely agree, Minashni. I think backgrounders and basic explanations of climate change are required with every report. And because most people, I think many South Africans now take climate change as being a synonym for general environmental degradation. And they don't understand the particular mechanics of this particular issue, you know, that it is caused by the release of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, and that the overwhelmingly large cause of that is the mining and use of fossil fuels. And I would also agree, Minashni, that the problem doesn't lie so much with the reporters and journalists who are trying to report this issue, but the problem of getting it past your gatekeepers in newsrooms. And
I kind of want to play devil's advocate to what you're saying there, David, when you say that the issue is for the general public, they don't know the difference between climate change and, general environmentalist issues. I argue that for many in the newsroom, they don't know the difference.
Well, I think there's a very good chance of that, and that's why we are hoping with this new reporting guide that we've released to start a basis for conversation with journalists and a basis for more training of journalists on these issues. And I think not only is there a poor understanding of the basic mechanics of climate change, but there is a terrible lack of appreciation of how fast this climate emergency really is unfolding. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've had major new scientific reports emerging showing that climate change, I think most people assume that it's going to be gradual, predictable, linear, and reversible. And actually, it's coming at us much faster than that. Climate scientists are getting horrible, nasty surprises all the time. We are facing what at the moment are now called tipping points, which is that the human contribution to climate change is going to be amplified by natural systems breakdowns, such as the melting of the Greenland ice cap, the melting of the West Antarctic ice cap, and very alarmingly, melting of permafrost in the northern parts of the world, which will then release carbon that is trapped in the ground, that will then further accelerate the global warming process. And we're just starting to understand these impacts. I mean, I was trying to think of an analogy for this, the kind of stories that Minoshni was referring to, that the political stories, the political soap opera that very often distracts us day to day. And you can put a fist in front of your face and you can cover up a mountain, but the mountain is still much bigger than the fist. And that's, I think, the problem that we face in our editorial presentation at the moment.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy, that as well. I'm listening to everything that you've said about, just how much trouble we're in as a planet. And I think part of the issue here is perhaps in South Africa, it sounds like such a distant problem, right? And that what we may be failing to do, Minoshni, is to, in a South African context, bring those examples of the trickle-down effect of what you've talked about, David, to me on a daily life, in my daily life as a South African, right? That perhaps we haven't sufficiently made the link between what David is talking about and the Durban floods early this year. Minoshni?
So, Naledi, I'd like to offer up a solution then to the dilemma. You asked earlier, do reporters themselves know, enough about climate change and how to adequately relay it? Part of the climate change journey for reporters is to inform, educate, and make aware as well. It's not simply to report on. It's a multifaceted reporting genre, climate change. In fact, environmental journalism as a whole, well, that's personally how I view it. But I think the solution I'd like to offer up is that, diaries are oftentimes, climate change stories are relegated within the genre, the beat of climate change or environmental journalism. And I think what we need to do is we need to broaden this. We need to link climate change to social impact. It oftentimes hurts the most vulnerable communities. We need to link climate change to profit and the bottom line. And I'll give you a very practical example. You referred to the flood incidents in KZN in April and May. Those two incidents could be seen as climatic weather events. And sadly, when we talk about climate change, we are waiting for something to happen. We're waiting for this massive event to happen, but it's what's happening to us and to communities every day. That's what we need to do. We need to break that mold of thinking. And the floods in KZN socially impacted communities that are still, hundreds of people have been displaced, hundreds still remain in community halls. We still find people in community halls from the 2019 floods in KZN. To this day, in community halls, after we had 2 climatic events in April and May this year. And if you link it to the business side of it, we had businesses that were forced to shut down, businesses that are still yet to recover, some have never opened, loss of income for staff and employees. So that's what I think we need to do. We need a solution going forward is not to isolate climate change stories on the diary as something that, sits on its own in a little corner. It's something that we should link and we can link. If you look at the ESCOM story at the moment, and options for South Africa to explore even more fervently renewable energy options, that is climate change. We shouldn't be sitting around waiting for something to happen. We need to link climate change to what is happening to communities, what is happening to people's pockets every day.
Yeah. It's not as if we've run out of examples. It's not as if we've run out of examples of where we have seen things happen. I mean, the Durban floods, Idai in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and other countries in the area. The examples surely are there, and yet we're not telling the story sufficiently. You guys are still rating us at a 2 out of 10, which is atrocious. But then I say to you, David, that, the reports are telling us that Africa is only responsible for about 4%, and you can correct my numbers here, for about 4% of global emissions. So why should Africa care, right? We're not the biggest contributors. Why do we need to tell the story? What is it that we can do about it once we've had the discussion? What do you say to that, David?
Well, the fact that we're a small contributor doesn't mean that we're not terribly affected by everybody else's emissions, because this problem is created at a global level. And South Africa as well, and we're not an insignificant polluter. We are one of the 12th or 13th largest emitter of carbon pollution in the world. So we bear formidable responsibility. And we're also, because we're still a largely developing continent, we have such terrible inequality, people are incredibly vulnerable here. So, but there's another side to it as well, which is that we stand to get enormous advantages economically and socially from making this transition faster rather than more slowly. I mean, in terms of international climate agreements, we negotiated the right to use fossil fuels longer than other countries as a kind of way of compensating for the fact that we'd used relatively few in the past historically. But that right was negotiated before renewable energy technology became much cheaper than fossil fuel technology. And once you start to factor in the external costs, the uncounted costs of carbon pollution, the air pollution, the deaths, the economic instability that we're seeing writ large across our news cycle now with the knock-on effects of the Ukraine conflict, there are so many other costs that come with using fossil fuels that we haven't fully reckoned into our equations, and that we really stand to benefit from moving away from now. And the transition is not easy. There are social challenges. We need a just transition for workers in affected industries in South Africa. But it's in everybody's best interests now to make this transition as fast as is possible, because the world on these issues has to move together. We can't stay behind.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about that transition, right? And I think that in South Africa, that's more a political discussion in our discourse than it is an environmental issue. What do you say to that, Minashni? That there's this, push and pull between what's happening with the renewable energy sector and, say, the Department of Mineral Resources, and how that now is more political than it is about the actual environment.
Unfortunately, Naledi, that's the position we find ourselves in as a country. And I think David summed up the key issues around our role as South Africa and where we should stand on the climate change conversation. We may not be a developed country, so the argument that we're a relatively small emitter and we're catching up in our developmental state, and so we're allowed not to invest in mitigating factors, simply does not hold water. The global COVID pandemic has showed us more than ever before that we're interconnected in the global environment. Yeah. And if we continue as a country to approach the them and not us, approach the issue as them and not us, then we're going to find ourselves in a really dire state when it comes to climate change, very soon. Like David said, it's a climate crisis. Yeah. And so I don't think waiting around for us to reach a certain point of critical tipping point regarding, and we're a country with a massive coastline. How do we not look at the impact of communities along this coastline? And the most vulnerable lying along this large stretch of coastline. Coastal management plans need to be in place. The amount of resources we have as a country for solar and wind energy resources, for instance, yes, a lot of it is political will, but a lot of it is all of us understanding and making the choice to understand.
Okay.
And that's where journalists play a critical role in this.
Yeah,
Yes.
maybe
We need
when we
journalists to
just a
inform the
second,
people
David,
who
I
can
need to
put
just
pressure.
step in there, David. Sorry,
Sorry.
we need to take a short break. And when we come back, what I'd really like for us to do is to start talking solutions, right? Perhaps some creative ideas on how journalists could make the discussion of climate change more accessible to you, and you can be part of the conversation as well. Share some of your ideas by calling 011-714-0661. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. Well, we're still discussing how the media covers climate change in South Africa. You can be part of the conversation as well by giving us a call on 011-714-0661. And perhaps you have some ideas on how we go about doing it so that you understand all the concepts around climate change, but also have a clear call to action. We have a caller on the line. Who's the name? Rasul from Johannesburg. Rasul, good morning to you.
Good morning, Naledi. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for calling.
Okay, I'm Dr. Rustin. I'm calling you from Midrand in Johannesburg. Just some interesting nuances around the conversation of climate change. The first point is my little study on the subject shows that carbon emissions really do not escape our atmosphere onto the stratosphere because it's impossible. So the argument that was saying that it depletes the ozone layer, it creates a blanket that changes the climate is to me like a hoax. And the disasters we're seeing today are not new. This has happened over time and it's cyclical. So let me tell you what my nuance is. I believe that renewable energy is a big thing today, but look at the paradox now. Germany, France, China, the US are buying coal from Africa in large quantities. And they are giving us money to move to renewable energy. Can you smelt iron? Can you smelt steel with renewable energy? No, you cannot. So the whole idea is to make our economies peripheral so that we do not become industrial. They're buying the coal and taking all the coal away from us and giving us money to use wind and whatever solar energy which cannot drive industrial production. There is a lot of politics around this whole subject matter of climate change. I think it's being manipulated. Let me stop there.
Okay, Dr. Rustin, thank you so much for calling. Interesting. I'd like to see some of that research if you've conducted it yourself. So please do send it through to us. But there's that narrative. Minashni, I actually want to bring this one to you and say, well, we are still dealing with many that believe that climate change is a hoax, that there's no such thing. So, how do media practitioners then deal with that?
We've got to keep on pushing on, Naledi. There's no other way to say it. The science and the data, like David has so eloquently conveyed in the last few minutes, the science and the data tells us that, yes, we can argue, like the caller has said, that these may just be seasonal or climatic, but the frequency and the intensity with which they are happening cannot be denied the world over. For instance, in KZN, we should not be seeing whales. Whale season is something relegated to the west coast of this country. In the last few years, whale season is very rife along the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal, and that has a lot to do with the changing environment and the ecosystem of our oceans. Things like this should not be happening. It impacts species production, impacts why they're here, how they travel back to the North Pole, and all of those kind of things. So we cannot deny what scientists are telling us.
Yeah.
Climate change is a very real climate crisis, in fact. It's not change any longer.
Yeah, David, I want to get your response to what Dr. Rustin has said, that, and my question would be then, how does the media deal with this narrative that we've heard even from the former president of the US, Donald Trump, and I seem to be quoting him a lot today, where he called it a hoax as well. How does the media deal with that issue? Are there creative ways of making this discussion accessible?
Well, yes, I mean, it is tricky because it is a complex, in some ways, a complex scientific issue to communicate to people. So the caller was, for example, conflating the issues of global warming and damage to the ozone layer, which are actually two somewhat separate issues. I mean, he made reference to the expanded coal production from Europe, which of course is a problem. But I think my experience as a science journalist and communicator and campaigner is that usually if you have the chance to sit down with people for half an hour to an hour and lay out the evidence in detail, evidence which, by the way, is overwhelmingly agreed on by scientific specialists, and 99% of climate scientists agree that this is happening, that human beings are the cause, and that it's terribly, terribly serious. There's really no significant remaining debate. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there are 80% of South Africans still don't understand these basics. And we have to, I think, with every climate report, start reminding people of the fundamentals of things like greenhouse gases, act like a blanket, wrapping around the world, trapping additional heat in the atmosphere, adding energy to climate systems, warming places that weren't previously warm, adding to the volume of moisture in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
These kinds of basic dynamics need to be communicated.
Yeah.
And we need to keep climate out of this environment niche that it's so often shoved into. It needs to get into headlines. It needs to get into business stories. It's
let me ask you
completely
this, David.
irresponsible.
Yeah, sorry, I'm jumping in, sorry, only because I'm trying to squeeze in one last question with you. Tell us about the work that you're doing then to help journalists tell those stories as briefly as you can.
Well, our work comes, we've just launched this climate reporting guide. I'm very glad to say that SANEF, the Editors Forum, have been enthusiastic and warmly received it. We're trying to get journalists to sign up to the newsletter that we've established to go along with the guide. It's a new program for us. We haven't yet managed to get dedicated funding for it. And our overall work as a campaign is challenging the influence of the fossil fuel industry, which has created propaganda to obscure this issue for so long. I mean, massive greenwashing has really contributed to the public lack of understanding of the climate crisis. Yeah. And fossil fuel companies are now claiming that they are going to cut emissions by 2050, but we don't have time for that. We need very dramatic cuts of 50% of emissions in this current decade if we're to get this crisis under control. Yeah. And I don't think that's being communicated by the media and the business media in particular.
Yeah, well, the work continues. Guys, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. David LePage, journalist and one of the authors of the new Fossil-Free SA Climate Report, and SABC's very own Minashni Pillay. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And remember, we're always keen to hear your thoughts on what topics you want us to cover here on Media and Society. Use hashtag SABC Media Society to share those ideas. From myself, Naledi Mulo, and the rest of the team, have yourselves a fabulous Sunday.